What's up, everybody? So I'm Dipcatcher. You can find me on Twitter at Tantonomini and on YouTube at Dipcatcher. And I am one of the founders of Maximus DAO. We are known for creating a type of HEX stake pool where we've so far have launched Maxi, Base, Trio, Lucky, and Deci. And so 5 stake pools have been launched. Basically, if you haven't heard about these yet, we ran these mint phases where you could deposit HEX into the contract, and then all the HEX was pooled and then staked. This introduces a lot of really good benefits for the user, such as over 99% gas fee savings, which if you've ended a stake recently on Ethereum, you definitely know the pain of a really high gas fee. So it consolidates all of that end stake gas into just one transaction. So, and just gives those savings to the users. And these HEX stakes are backed by a liquid token. And so you can do things like you can trade your coins, during the duration of the stake. Sometimes there's a premium, sometimes there's a discount. You can also break it up into numerous wallets for added security. There's a lot of benefits to having liquid HEX stakes. And so we pooled about 1 billion HEX through a series of launches in 2022. And the first one was Maxi. It was in May of 2022. About 294 million HEX was put into that contract. And then Base, Trio, Lucky, and Deci. We just experienced the first Base 1-year HEX stake cycle, which ended in October. So we saw the Base stake earn about 12% on its HEX. So those are the main HEX products. We've also built a handful of other products and assets, generally just to support the HEX and PulseChain investor experience. So yeah, that's those are the pool tokens.
Yep, and I'm Alex. You can find me on Twitter at Synergy, and it's spelled how it's laid out there for you. I'm the creator of Hedron and Icosa. In a gist, Hedron, which came out first, I don't remember, it was sometime in 2022, I believe, and might have even been 21. But anyway,
I thought it was March.
Was it March? You know so. Better than I do. But Hedron's a system which allows you to be continually rewarded for remaining a HEX staker, and it also enables the encapsulation of HEX stakes into NFTs. So far, that's encapsulated over 1.2 billion HEX, which is kind of an awesome number. After Hedron's launch, Icosa came out, which allowed you to stake or mine additional Hedron or these new Icosa tokens. They integrate with Hedron's auction system. It's one of the things Hedron enabled you to do was borrow these Hedron tokens in advance. And so the 2 tokens that kind of complement to each other and both build upon HEX and integrate the share rate in interesting ways. And it's been a great ride so far. And yeah.
What was the inspiration? Why'd you make Hedron and why'd you make Icosa?
HEX was the first. HEX was probably the first ERC20 contract. I'd been in crypto for a little while, and there were a lot of ERC20s out there. Most of them are open Zeppelin, copy, paste, put a name on it. HEX was the first one that actually required me to think and actually analyze some code to be like, okay, that's kind of cool. That's how they're doing X, Y, or Z, right? So part of me started to really like HEX largely just through its design principles. And the complexity of the code written. It's one of the things I say a lot is, a very good chunk of the HEX contract is the Bitcoin free claim piece. And it's probably honestly bigger than the staking piece. And it is a masterful art piece of code that I'm not entirely certain I could have even written. And I was just kind of in awe at how much work went into just making this thing, which is relatively simple, right? It's if you had Bitcoin within a state range, okay, you get some free HEX or whatever. But the amount of complexity involved with uploading UTXO sets as Merkle trees and doing all the verifications, actually quite a lot. So that was something that along with the rest of how Hex works got me really interested in writing in ERC20, and really just kind of inspired my imagination to go around and saying like, well, what other cool things can you do with this, right? So I honestly think we are probably one of the only communities that have like around one ERC20 contract that are actively developing new things that go on top of it. It's like kind of a thing that doesn't exist in the rest of crypto space.
I can't think of anything. I mean, there's obviously ETH and Bitcoin, which have pretty expansive financial ecosystems built around it. But as far as like standalone ERC20 tokens, maybe someone in the chat
like
remind us of one, but yeah,
it's kind of a thing that doesn't exist anywhere else. So I think that's a really unique thing that we have as a community, and so it's just what Hex is really just inspired me to like do other cool things with it, and I think there's still more cool things people can do with it. So, as long as people care about it, that's all it takes.
Yeah, it's funny about that, like the Bitcoin free claim, because I think it kind of speaks to like the original concept of Hex was meant to be just like a Bitcoin fork on Ethereum, and so before all the staking features were introduced and everything else, that it was meant to be that. So it kind of makes sense that so much effort went into that, just kind of like the fork generation. But then it turns out, I think only like 2% of the actual like of all Bitcoin that was eligible to claim, or at least of all eligible UTXOs, the controllers of those, only like a 2% of all Bitcoin users actually claimed, which was kind of interesting. That it
like if I go back in that time, it's like I remember vividly on Twitter a lot of Bitcoin holders being like, I'm not going to verify this message and put it on there because I'm worried you're going to steal my Bitcoin. And it was funny to me because like they didn't even understand how that was actually impossible. Like, you can't be done. But that was such a weird. It's funny how times have changed since then.
And there was an easy way to like. I mean, when I did that's kind of what really brought me into. I mean, I was kind of following Richard, but then I was actually really fascinated by the fork with Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin, and just kind of all the calamity after that. And really, it was just like a debate around like basically a parameter in the network, and it was kind of turned into like a broader like political thing. So I was kind of always interested in these forks, and I was trying to keep up with all, like Bitcoin Diamond, Bitcoin Gold, like all these things. And then, I mean, the original name was Bitcoin Hex, and it was kind of meant to kind of follow that that path. But then I think it ended up being the right decision that it kind of turned into its own thing, where the Bitcoin piece was secondary. But I remember I sold my Tacoma to get Bitcoin for the Hex free claim. So
did you really?
I had zero money. Yes, I sold my out of Tacoma, and then so it's kind of funny. But then with the free claim, I was all paranoid too, because like that back then it's like trust no one. I mean, still that's trust no one. Now there's a little bit more kind of awareness, but so I waited for the snapshot, and then I moved all my coins to like a brand new wallet and everything, just to avoid any risk of issue. And but yeah, it's quite sad when people let their just like preferences kind of prevent them from capturing opportunity. Probably the most successful Bitcoin fork. I mean, I don't know in terms of like value, like per unit, like compared to other things. Like I know Bitcoin Cash was substantial for a while, but I think that Hex may be one of the most successful Bitcoin forks, even though it's kind of evolved beyond that.
Well, and it's kind of funny to me. Well, I'll touch on two things. It's funny to me that you sold your Tacoma for it, because like I'm in like a different situation, but like when I first got into Hex, it was like I had absolutely like I'd probably eaten like 50-60% loss believing in the idea that like Litecoin was going to be the next big thing. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll throw this at this Hex thing. So I'm not infallible. I did make that mistake. But I think the funniest thing to me though about Hex was like, so it launched, right? It was built, kind of changed from its original different, like originally just going to be this Bitcoin fork, and then kind of became its own thing, and it launched. And then, when that happened, like I forget, do you remember what the exchange was? Was it Hit BTC? Was that the exchange that listed Hex first?
Either Hit BTC or Hotbit or Bybit.
I think it was Hotbit.
Or Bybit,
or Bybit. It was something like that. One of those ones you probably shouldn't use. But that we were using it because it was like the only thing that had. And then Uniswap came out, and like I don't know if that's just like some kind of, I don't know if like Richard's truly a mastermind and he like knew Uniswap was going to come out, or
I thought Uniswap launched before. I thought Uniswap predated Hex.
I think V1 did, but no one really used it. V2 is when people really started using it. And I would say most people, when you launch something on a contract, it turns out no one really likes it or uses it. Like, you don't make a V2. Like, you're just like, okay, well, this sucks. No one uses it.
Yeah.
But when
there's another
V2 came out,
I can't remember what it was called, but that was like the only other option.
Oh, yeah.
Does
it even exist anymore? I can't even remember.
I think so, because I started hearing about it when the ETHW and ETHF forks happened.
Oh, because it's probably the only one that actually worked, kind of.
Yeah. But
because V3 was broken on those. But yeah, man, it's so hard to, like, that's like 2019, man. I'm getting old.
Yeah,
but
really ancient over here.
Yeah.
When did you first think to encapsulate Hex stakes, and like when were like the first discussions you were having with that, or just like first thoughts, and like when was that?
Well, at first I just wanted to. First it was like, my first thought was like, I wonder if you can do this, and I didn't really dig super deep on it, and I figured basically it wasn't really until Hexi, if you don't remember Hexi, but that was a thing. But when Hexi came out, that's when I kind of started actually looking into it. After that all fell apart, but it was before Hexi I thought about it. It's like, man, wouldn't it be great if you could just like make these stakes, and then it's like, okay, well, I got a new wallet, or maybe I want to gift one to somebody or whatever. Like, wouldn't it be great if you could just move them around? And I just kind of assumed it must be impossible, or else it would have been done. And saying it was impossible actually is kind of true, right? Because like you could have built it into the Hex contract. It was pretty big as it was, but you couldn't have built the NFT part into it, because like Hedron's like 3 contracts, right? It needs this multi-contract interaction to work, and that was a whole fun part of figuring out how to make that work in a mostly secure way, I guess. But it's annoying that you can't just make something that is like, okay, this section of the contract's ERC20 and this section's ERC721. It's like, okay, no, you actually have to make those 2 different things and have a glue layer. It's a whole piece. But anyway, it wasn't really until Hexi fell apart that because I thought Hexi would be like a thing, like, oh, okay, cool, someone else is passionate about Hex, they're going to build something that's going to be great. And then it absolutely wasn't. And I was like, okay, well, if this is what people are going to do, then maybe I'm going to actually do this. So probably around that time is where I got, heavily invested and just started doing everything. What about Maxi? What made you want to do that?
I started thinking about the concept, like it might have been before Hex launched. There's like chats of me in the Hex channel talking about the concept of an aftermarket, like a resale market for Hex stakes. And then, so it's kind of always planted in my mind. And I think it was because of something that Richard had said in a video before Hex launched. So just kind of that as a concept. And so like I had, coming from Bitcoin, I was kind of fascinated about some of the financial products built around, like some of the Bitcoin derivatives and futures contracts. So kind of, I was coming into it thinking about like, how do you like, that, like I view that as a big growth piece in Bitcoin's history, is kind of this financialization. And so early on in Hex, I was like, okay, like if this is going to be successful, that's going to be part of this, of its success, is the financialization of the Hex token as an asset. And so, kind of early on, I was thinking about it. It's like early on, I started thinking about it as not related to the gas fees, more just like as a speculative thing. But like a, you know, ease of use type of thing. But like, so I was always waiting. Like I thought like the Staker app, rest in paradise to that, but I thought they were going to come out with a encapsulated hex stake thing. I remember reading their contract that they had published, that, you know, and I was like, okay, well, like they'll probably do this. No need. And then that just kind of never came out. And then I think what it really was that actually drove me to take action was when I started to understand the relationship between length of stake and the gas cost to end the stake. And I did that because someone that I had onboarded early, they'd done like a 2-year stake, and they asked me to send them ETH so that they're like, I don't have this much ETH. You know, because at the time it was high gas fees and high ETH price. And so I was just wondering, I couldn't figure out why it was so expensive. And then I kind of just dug around the contract and learned about like S load and what causes the price to go up. And so that kind of was like further planting it in my mind. And then when the S load increased and it caused a direct 3x in the gas fees for ending the stake, like when that EIP got rolled out on Ethereum, it was like, okay, like this is a serious, like that was kind of the thing. I was like, okay, like this basically needs to be done. Because like I calculated that if they were to decrease it by that same amount, then a max length hex stake couldn't be ended. And so a lot of, which on one hand is very bullish because all that inflation related to those max length stakes would now suddenly be gone. But it would just suck for all the users and would probably either require some type of fork or some type of, or I don't know. I mean, I think that would just be part of the game. You know, it's like you really, it's just part of the speculative nature of it all. But that was kind of what really drove that, was just the gas fees and the you know, more so than the liquidity, which I think is what, I mean, probably because, you know, you won't experience the gas fee savings on like the Maxi stake for another 13 years or so. So like, it kind of makes sense that that's not people's immediate focus today. More people now benefit from the liquidity aspect, which actually I think like has been pretty awesome to watch unfold. Someone in the community named HEX they made a site, lookintomaxi.com, which shows amazing information about all the HEX stake pools that we've made. And so just watching how those premiums and discounts have gone is actually, I think, a really, really interesting phenomena, you know, where it kind of shows how there's been almost like an inverse yield curve on these, where the longer the stake, the higher the discount. And so I think probably what that is just like the, you know, less urgency to buy it. You know, it's like, it's not coming due for a long time. And if the discount's already low, maybe the user thinks that it's going to go lower. But, you know, and then also now after PulseChain, seeing how the market's, you know, viewing the stake pool tokens on the different, sorry, my camera keeps bugging out, but, you know, see how the market's appraising the value of pooled hex on PulseChain versus pooled hex on Ethereum. And when I was looking at it earlier today, what stood out to me was that on Ethereum, the DESI premium is only 4% right now, or the DESI discount. DESI's held the discount the whole time, but then on PulseChain, the DESI discount is 22%. And so it's kind of, to me, that kind of does suggest that, like, at least, you know, among the cohort of people that are trading DESI, they may be factoring in the gas costs on Ethereum more so than they are on PulseChain by about 5 times. So I think some, you know, interesting information beyond, you know, just kind of tapping into what the audiences around these assets are feeling and how it relates on both chains. I think that's been really, really interesting to watch. It's just how those markets have unfolded.
Yeah, what's really interesting to me is what the PulseChain launch and how it radically, it's like it really just changed the entire dynamic of everything within minutes. Like, it was immediate when it happened.
Yeah.
And it's understandable it's something I talked to a lot of people about, and we talked about a lot about how, how this ultimately potentially plays out. And there's like so many possible different ways, right? Everyone likes to fantasize about, well, this could happen or that could happen, and so on and so forth. But what I find interesting is we went from this place where Hex is predominantly like UD or USDC based, and that's like fantastic from the aspect of, it's like if you're paying on USDC and you buy something paired with USDC with anything, doesn't matter what it is, like the price of that thing goes up, just how it is. And if you sell it, the price goes down. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. That's just how it works, because that USDC or DAI or whatever you're paired to, as long as that thing is relatively stable, that's just how it's going to be. But when that Pulse launch happened and we forked out and everyone said, okay, well, now I have these huge Pulse bags, so I'm going to pair everything with that. And we're like, I like to call it like a Jello floor. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but like I look at the Hex chart daily, right? And a lot of times I'm like, oh, the volume's like 15% green. Why is price down? And it's like, oh, because Pulse is down. Its volume's red, and it being like the bedrock of Hex, more or less, or in basically everything on PulseChain. Everything's beholden to it, and it does. There's like all these super interesting things. Do we have like the bubble thing for PulseChain yet? Has anyone made that? I know.
Yeah, I think the GoPulse team made one.
GoPulse has it.
Yeah,
I'll have to check that out.
Mm-hmm.
That's gotta be fun to look at. But I've looked at like percentages before, and it's like, okay, PulseChain today up 2%, and like this one random coin that's paired with it, but it has like $5 of liquidity, so it jumps around all the time. It's like up, and it's up like 1,000%. Not that it matters, but as the liquidity thins on things that are paired to Pulse, the thinner they are, the higher they pump, the harder they fall. The higher, basically, the more reactionary they are to Pulse movements. But Hex being basically one of the thickest things paired to Pulse, it's not as extreme, but it's deceiving, because you look at price charts and you look at these trades that people are making, and it's like, okay, volume green, price down, doesn't make sense. But if you price it in Pulse, it's like, it's up. And I wish maybe someone will do this. Maybe I'll do it. I don't know. But I wish there was better tooling for like viewing the liquidity pairing state. Maybe not across the whole chain, because it would be gigantic, but of things that above X liquidity point.
Yeah.
And if you could probably do that into some kind of rainbow table that would like really paint a really good picture of like, oh, this is what's happening, this is what people are doing, and this is why the things you see are the things you're seeing. But it's funny to me that it's like almost like two bear markets, right? Like, I don't know if you've noticed that, but like, Hex had its bear market, and then it kind of leveled out, and then Pulse launched, and Hex actually didn't have another bear market, right? There weren't like these massive, there's some big sellers, but there weren't these massive sellers like there were the first round. It just went down because Pulse now had its bear market, and it took Pulse with it, or took Hex with it because of the pairing. And like, is that opposite in a bullish situation, right? Like if we're basically double bear, I don't know. Like that's like a theoretical thing.
I kind of think I kind of agree that like it's like Hex had its bear market, and then it's because it's just like I'm still here. I'm still here.
Can you guys see me, or is
I can see
the
you?
One disconnected?
I can see you. I think
it's me.
Yeah, I think we're. Oh no. Okay, well, hopefully Alex can resolve the camera issue that must be ongoing. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what he's saying about how like part of like what I guess amplified like an already existing hexagon bear market that we'd already been. There you are.
Yeah, kicked off.
Yeah. What I was just saying was that like I think that's a good point about how like HEX on its own had its bear market ongoing, and then when PulseChain launched, for a handful of reasons, it kind of had its own bear market, like, and then because it's like huge overlap of like the audiences, and just like, because it took 2 years to come out from, or, I mean, or it was like 1.5 years from when like the sacrifices were, a little bit more than 1.5 years. And so like people who had been sitting on a lot of value from then, that it was kind of like deferred, kind of years in the future, because HEX was down so much and many people had sacrificed HEX for Pulse. And now like Pulse, they kind of viewed it as like part of their HEX that they may have already had. Then that like introduced like a class of sellers who are basically selling HEX at, 20 cents or whatever it was. And so that, and then also I think that like, just how much demand was absorbed in those sacrifices, like in a way where it created supply. Like the more demand that there was in the sacrifices, the more supply that there was. So I think that that's something that's probably like, I view that as the number one kind of thing kind of holding the ecosystem back, is just like how much of that economic energy was just absorbed without, impacting price and creating supply. So like, I think that like, which I think gets resolved through time and just the recirculation of supply, as people sell, new people step in and buy, and, however long that takes. But I think that probably for the same reasons that kind of like made a PulseChain bear market amplify a HEX bear market, then perhaps a PulseChain bull market can amplify a HEX bull market. So I guess that remains to be seen, kind of how all that plays out. But because it's like it's already gone down so much, and so it's kind of like in an area where you can have high multiples. And with PulseChain, being down, I mean, PulseX is probably the big one that like the valuation of like the market cap is probably, I mean, it may even still be overpriced if we're being honest, so, but like having a big reset on the values of some of those assets, I think that's kind of what it takes to, kind of carry forward, and, new things happening outside of the ecosystem as well. All kind of feed into that into those cycles. So, but hopefully it it has that amplification, that we heard talking about.
Yeah, that's kind of like one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is, if we kind of got this pseudo double bear, like, do we get a pseudo double bull, or does that not happen? And nobody knows the answer. But it's one of the things I try to think about, the relationships of all these things, because at this point, everything's kind of married to a degree, in various ways, and I'm curious how those relationships change in an upward movement. So I think there's an interesting, like, it's kind of like being in I don't know, it's kind of like being in like the first 3 to 5 years of Ethereum, but super compressed into a shorter span of time. Because like people already knew things going into this, when Ethereum first launched, like nobody knew what it was, nobody knew how it worked. It was a very slow, gradual thing. And it's like when PulseChain launched, like, well, everyone already knows everything from Ethereum. So it opens the door to a lot like crazier, faster action stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But I don't know. I think it's good. Could be crazy.
Yeah.
Think about the future. It's kind of fun.
And crazy things can always happen, or like, new, like, I think that like when PulseChain launched, it changed everything, not just from, there now being a chain that hexagons can use. It made our kind of local ecosystem a lot more competitive, because now there's, it started out as, like the hex and, various formats of hex that you can hold in, like through our products and stuff. But then now there's, an L1, and there's like a DEX product, and then there's the whole ecosystem of things going, outside of that. And it kind of broke through that, like, kind of singular ecosystem focus. And so I think that changed, everything, which I think is good. Like, I think, one, it's like you can't control it. Like, if there's opportunity there, then there's going to be people building. And there's always demand for speculating on high risk things, because everyone wants to hit that 10,000x. And so, like, there's always going to be people wanting to buy something new, because if something starts with 100 users and then grows to, 100,000 users, that can go up 10,000x. Like, I think that over the first couple of days in HEX, there was only like 2,000 addresses that participated in it. And then, from there to when it reached 100,000 users, like, that massive growth in, adoption, that's like what delivers that, huge performance. And so, like, there's always going to be demand for that. And so I think that, like, it kind of opened up Pandora's box a little bit. And it really kind of changed everything, which I think is good, because, like, if HEX, is going to be like the superior asset, like, it has to outperform its competitors. Like, it has to be, there need to be competitive forces that kind of drive that. And so I think that, like, while it may have caused some type of short-term kind of bearishness, now that there's so many other options in the ecosystem, I think that long-term it will be for the better, that there are competing assets that, that it would need to overcome. And so I think, it'd be painful in the short term, it's kind of a good thing long term.
Well, and that's the other thing, is like, is it really competition if everything pairs to Pulse in the end? Like what are you competing over, right? It's like in the way things were on Ethereum, like, everyone's basically competing over USDC, right? But now everyone's competing over Pulse, and if Pulse does well, then it all does well, right? Like, kind of this.
Yeah, it's probably just things relative to each other. Like, token A goes up 1,000x, token B goes up 100x. You like, token A outperformed it. Those people are going to be, chanting online, wallowing in their victory, and the other group is going to be salty. So kind of that competition, I guess.
Yeah, but I feel like that competition's healthier, like, in the end, for, like, as an ecosystem type of situation. Like, if you're looking at it from that viewpoint, that's a healthier level of competition in my eyes. And I think, I think there's a lot of unique things in, the history of HEX, right? It's like I was saying earlier, with, like, basically made Uniswap relevant, and then basically was like, okay, well, you got, like, created an entire L1. Now you can argue, like, that's out of design of, okay, well, its gas prices were too high, but they weren't, right? They weren't too high until Ethereum made them too high. And the response to that is, okay, well, we'll do something even bigger and better. So, like, from a technological standpoint, I think there's, like, PulseChain's awesome to me. I think HEX is awesome, and I think it's awesome that, you're building things, I'm building things. There's tons of people in this conference that are building things, people not in this conference that are building things. Good and bad. Like, you can't make it all good, but I try to think of, like, where, like, just from, like, the blockchain idea, from a technological standpoint, like, where we are at now versus where we were, just being HEX and maybe a thing on top of it, or two things on top of it. I think we're better now, personally. I think there's massively more room to do bigger and better things as things are currently. So,
yeah, I mean, because, like, right now, if you consider the combined EHEX and PHEX price, it's about 1.27 cents. And that was the price on day 472. So HEX had gone on for a year and a half under these values. And like at the time, like that was like a shocking, 450-day bull run that was going on. And so like, I think because honestly, I think that HEX got too high. Like it maybe shouldn't have hit 50 cents because like there are other things that were factoring into that, like the sacrifices were absorbing a lot of demand, and that's when it was reflected on the chart. Yeah, I think it can have an effect. Like if that HEX does remain, just sitting there liquid and does nothing, it can, I think, make later bull runs a little bit more aggressive because that supply was absorbed. But a lot of the impact of that was prior to the sacrifice because people were buying the HEX in preparation for it. And so like, that kind of enabled the price to go so high. Like I always tell, like, when I look at the price and I get all sad because it's down from, the glory days of the very highs, I try to remind myself like what would my mindset be had, instead of HEX going on that crazy run in 2021, like what if it had just kind of inched up slowly to where it is today? I'd probably still be quite happy. And so like kind of, I think that the whole massive, that final, 50x pretty much, it kind of, it was kind of an anomaly. And so I think that like, and so it's basically like we've given back the gains from 2021.
Sure.
And which, all things considered, like, and between then and now, like, at that time, I mean, what was there? There was stake wrap, really. Now there's not, which is kind of funny that like that was like the main thing built around HEX at the time. And then, you building HEX Hedron and us building, the Maxi stuff, that was like in the bear market. And so like, now the ecosystem is advanced, price is kind of reset to, before that final 50x. And, it can't be stopped. Like it continues to persist. And I think that's like many different coins have gone, kind of experienced that. Like in 2021, things pumped that, perhaps shouldn't have, or, things pumped for whatever reason. But during their bear market, there wasn't like massive advancement in the ecosystem around it, And so I think that, some of the dynamics that have caused the bear market to feel so serious, they're certainly there. But the ecosystem growth as a whole, I think, is really like second to none. I mean, ETH and Bitcoin, those ecosystems kind of grow and evolve, and those are much larger markets than ours. But kind of head to head against other assets, there's really a lot of important growth that is taking place.
Yeah, I think one of my thoughts that I've had, I have no idea if this is true, it's like a kind of a theoretical thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's like the dynamic, presumably, of HEX that, maybe or maybe did not make it, hit the price that it hit in its bull run. But the presumable dynamic is like, okay, you have this thing, it's going up in price, you can buy it, and you can, basically lock it up to obtain more of it through, minting those rewards, but you have to push it out further in the future, right? So that dynamic, kind of like if the price is doing this, you buy, you lock that up, but you can't sell till here, right? So if all these people are doing this, does that create an exponential price movement if the majority of people are buying and doing that thing because they can't sell? Like the price can't go down unless somebody sells it. And then is the top not a pinnacle point of where the earliest people who did that are now able to unstake and start minting that value down? And so is the very same thing that makes HEX do, that potentially made HEX do these crazy things, because at the end of the day, it could have just been people degenning into it. It's like, like it's hard, you can't analyze that information, but if that's the mechanism, like my argument would be is like maybe the things that make HEX do crazy things on the upside, maybe it also makes it do crazy things to the downside immediately after. And then there's a point at where maybe the cycle repeats, maybe it doesn't. I'm in the cycle repeat camp personally, but I'm just a simple man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that it's like the demand pushes it up, and then and if the demand is to stake, if that's like the primary driver and why people are buying is because they want to stake it, and then now that creates new supply, especially from like first year, like with the way that like big payday, because there was such low Bitcoin free claim, it caused, and there was, well, and until the staking from the OA kind of brought it to where it was, but the 30% on the short end, hundreds of percent on the long end, those, and then that caused a 30% ratcheting up of the share rate. Those users who got in the first year, they are creating more supply than someone who got in after that. And so I think that that demand that drove that then created more supply. And so it kind of makes sense that my camera, it just, I don't know what is going on. I'm sorry, but yeah, like just working. that the result of the time locks, and then I think now, like, there's, I think that the PHUX is like a point in that direction, like with like the leverage, and there's some other things that I've kind of been prototyping, kind of just broadly in the category of being able to speculate on future hex value, outside of just spot holding X. I think that over time, as like the financial ecosystem continues to develop, that there's going to be the ability to price in those like future supply shocks that come from like massive stakes from the early days ending. And so I think that the early cycles will probably, it's kind of like Bitcoin, like, the early cycles are massive and they seem to be getting kind of tapered. Like I think the last cycle, like you kind of had that double top instead of like the classic blow off top and then 85% retrace. There's kind of a different shape to that. And I think a lot of that has to do with there's now all different types of ways to speculate on the future value, where prior it was all done through spot trading. Now there's options, there's, like the high leverage stuff. And so there's that will probably happen as Hex matures, like the impact of those like big, like demand absorption from purchases that then go into staking, where they're like that demand doesn't turn to supply just yet because it's delayed through the staking. I think that probably it'll kind of diminish over time. But
yeah, and like, one of the things that's nice to me, like, like if there's any blessing in the end result of all this stuff at this point in time, with the market being what it is it's given me, I mean, obviously as a developer, and you probably feel this way as well, being thrust into this like Pulse ecosystem. Okay, well, the complexity of everything that we do is now at least double, if not more, because some of the joys of life that are provided for free for us on the Ethereum side don't exist, and we've got to go rebuild those things. But it's given me a lot of time to go and say, okay, where are the technical pain points? Where are the things that not only that I'm feeling as a developer, but other developers are feeling, and how can we try to make these better and try to improve, just like ground layer stuff. And since that launch, we had the luxury of being out on Ethereum, ahead of time, but the whole ecosystem has like really changed a lot now with a lot of this Pulse only stuff launching. So I don't know, it's nice to like be able, on one hand, it's like we're kind of thrust in this multi-chain ecosystem and everything's more complicated, and there's things that that I'm working on and that you're working on that potentially I know I for sure have had to rethink some things, because like the whole thing's different now, right? Ideas that I thought were set in stone before, it's like, oh, actually it's actually not true anymore. And yeah, it's the bear market, at least from that perspective, allows the time to do those things and not have to sit around and looking at charts. So I know that doesn't help anybody else except us, because like we're the only ones sitting here, you know, and people like us are the only ones sitting here like just writing code all day or whatever we're doing. But you know, that's been the only.
I see name in the chat asking when icosahedron v2 a pool party. So like, what are some things that you've learned throughout this whole thing that you're implementing in like the upgrade that you're going to be rolling out soon?
Well, one of the things is bridges suck. Our bridge is pretty good. Like the Pulse bridge is actually, of all the bridges I've ever used, it's significantly one of the better ones. But it breaks things, right? It's like to me, like one of the things that I really want to address, and you know, I've said this before, but it's like, hey, you know, if you take a token from one chain to another, why is it just a thing that has to do nothing, right? Why is it only valuable in the sense that it has this linked value? It's like, why don't we do things with those tokens? And of course, we can't allow them to do all the same things, right? There's security implications. There's the fact that the chains don't talk to each other, where you are, and at the end of the day, just like trusting this bridge. I also have the viewpoint that, you know, we're kind of trusting the bridge regardless whether things integrate with it or not. So, you know, like that's one thing that I think is really important in a multi-chain environment, just like this ease of transactability of moving between the two. Because there's times on Ethereum where like, oh, okay, the ETH gas is like really low right now, right? You should be able to take advantage. You should take advantage of that. And like the gas is almost always low on PulseChain. You know, just having that fluidity, I think, is a better user experience, better UX for anyone who can do anything with that. So that's one of the areas I'm playing around with. Yeah, as far as like people ask me when icosahedron v2 all the time, and talked about a lot about what that will do. And the reality, it's just we're in a much more complicated place now. And like, how do you even audit some of these things, right? That's one of my biggest things right now is like, okay, you can audit a thing against one chain relatively easily. There's someone who'll do it. If you want to get an audit on PulseChain, you know, there's places that won't even do it because they think it's different, even though it isn't. But if you want to audit, like, hey, this thing communicates interchain through a bridge, who audits that? You know, your list of people who can actually help you are very, very, very little. So, you know, what about you? What's been your complexities? And
so with Pool Party coming out, it's kind of like a kind of like how like Team, that ecosystem, just like a new platform for creating more and more of these hex stake pools. And so we have that coming out. There's actually a lot that I've kind of picked up from the whole year or two through all this. Some stuff that's going into the actual like party contract. So that contract is basically like an income distribution system, kind of like the Team one. The Team was like kind of like you know, where it's on like an annual income distribution one. Pool Party is on a 2-week one. Because I think that like there's a lot of benefits to having the long-term 1-year one, but I think that goes hand in hand and nice alongside like a shorter term income distribution cycle. And so kind of that premise, like shortening that's something I learned just kind of seeing how the dynamics in the Team and the perpetuals worked out. And then also like structuring the launch in a way that that amplifies liquidity, leans into scarcity, and doesn't absorb demand during like a launch mechanism that could otherwise be going into the market. So just how like that's been something that's really stood out to me just in the last couple of years. Just like seeing how like the effect, and even seeing that in like the Team launch, like way more Maxi was minted into Team, for instance, than I thought. I thought it was going to be very small participation, and so even like seeing that, like, you know, firsthand, and same with Deci, like way way, a huge amount. That one's a little different because it's like, backed and like it's less speculative. It's like just backed by a token, but like you kind of see that in the discounts. PulseX had a massive sacrifice, and so those things that I've kind of seen, like I think that's like growing more and more important, is to like not be absorbing so much demand like in the launch of new things, and just creating more opportunity for for people who inject energy into the market. And then also been exploring a lot of new concepts around hex stake pooling, like the perpetuals. That was kind of like the basic like cut and dry stake pool. But now that with Pool Party, it's going to be more of a like platform where people can organize their own pools. Makes a lot of sense to have numerous types of stake pools. So for instance, like some concepts are like liquidity boosted ones where there's some portion of the supply is just minted as liquidity, and then maybe some portion of the hex deposited is also joined in as liquidity, and so you can have more liquidity on that token. So that's exploring concepts around illiquid stake pooling, and so just a whole lot of things that just seeing how the perpetuals have played out, seeing how the markets are taking place. I think that there's going to always be like room for new innovations around this concept, and so that's kind of what Pool Party is meant to be, like the channel for those. It's a lot more flex, like because with Team it's kind of rigid, like the coins, like the contracts that can pay into it, and the coins that can be distributed as rewards to the team stakers, like that, those are like hard coded in. So Pool Party is a little more flexible. So mainly a lot of introspection, like seeing what I thought worked well with some of our launches, and seeing what what has worked well and what has not worked well in other launches outside of our own stuff. So that was kind of a lot of kind of introspection, and it's actually kind of like, because we put out a version of Pool Party on testnet that we were basically ready to launch, but then I started just wanted to really like try to challenge myself on like opinions that I had, or like it's like, okay, whatever the topic was, I'm like, okay, what if you're wrong on that? Like, what if reality is the opposite of what at the time I was thinking? And so it's really trying to challenge those, and not. I heard this saying, and I think it honestly applies for everyone across the board. It was from like some hedge fund man, like an interview with some hedge fund manager from like the 90s, and he said that his big piece of success was to not believe his own bullshit. And so like just kind of really trying to challenge like my own thoughts and perspectives, I think has been really helpful in kind of like this new version. That's a big upgrade from the version that we put out on testnet, and I'm pretty thankful that there's kind of been like a drawn out bear market, and also I was kind of waiting for, because it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense to launch new pools when there's big discounts, but the discounts have kind of started to evaporate. So now it's like really kind of time to kind of start with more and more hex stake pools. So this year there's going to be a whole lot of new hex stake pools coming out, new dynamics around trying to grow these pools with like the supplement, that like the Pool Party kind of how Team like grew like 1 billion hex stakes on that one, kind of similar concepts here. So this year I think is going to be a big year for all that, and hopefully that turns into helping Hex have a really big year as well.
Yeah, I think what's been interesting to me with all this really has been just the about really, like you're saying, like just really challenge yourself and think about things. What if it's not the case? Like one of the things I think you've been you hinted on a little bit, but it's like, how do you incentivize? Like, how do you write code that has the right incentives to statistically result in the most probabilistic positive result, right? And there's a lot of cases, a lot of edge cases in there. Like you obviously can't do them all. You have to write an infinite amount of code. But then also something I've been thinking about is like, well, as a derivative of something, how do you differentiate that thing from what is underlying it in times of like now, like we're in a bear market, right? All these things are liquidity paired. They are fated to do more or less what Pulse does to a degree. Ratios can change a little bit, but it's like, is there a way you can not have that be a factor? is it like programmatically? I don't actually know the answer to that one. I think there's things you can do that like maybe influence it. I don't think you can actually undo it. Like I don't think it's like it's a force of nature because of the way that it is, right? Like you can't just undo this like physical law of blockchain. But
yeah,
it is funny like how set in stone that is. I mean, you know, we call it Hart's law and all that stuff, but it is actually kind of a law. Like you can't there. I don't think there's a way to actually break it, but I think there's ways to influence it and kind of manipulate it in a way that programmatically that works in the favor of all things. And that and interoperability are like the two things that I'm probably spending most of my time ensuring work well. Like I want someone to be able to take this token. I've got the Ethereum version. Go to PulseChain. It's like, oh, well, now it's basically just the Pulse version. Like, unfortunately, it still has to be two technically different tokens, but you won't care because it won't matter. You know, and then what does that look like in a liquidity pool? I don't know, right? Like people have to figure that out. And so it's a lot of work, but it's like that added complexity is almost like a nice challenge, right? It's like, you know, I know I can do something cool. I know you can do something cool, but that like idea of like, oh, well, we're at this bear market. Can we do something really cool? You know, and I think we're both kind of probably in a similar spot there.
Yeah. Quick question, but before I think our time's almost up, but with I know a lot of the people that hold the Maximus assets, because I mean, the Maximus assets are some of the highest earning or highest holding Hedron people, like between Poly and then also with like Maxi that got like the 8x, or no, it got the 5x multiplier for the bonus. So with like any new version of that, have you figured out how those like kind of what those users should do or kind of what to expect around that, or is that still?
So I'm experimenting with some code that, and I can't confirm to you whether this actually 100% works now. I know it works in my testing. But it effectively is reading the Maxi contract, and then when that claim window opens, or in the base or whatever contract is doing, when that withdrawal window is open, right? It's basically emulating the Maxi behavior internally and saying, okay, you're going to withdraw your Maxi into the HEX and Hedron. That contract does, but you can also go do it over here in this new token, and then whatever's left at the end, there's a whole math thing that it seems to track, but I can't guarantee that it tracks forever, like based on the percentage of people that claim and don't claim and whatever. So like that's kind of the direction I'm going with, because I don't really like the idea of like a one-time claim Merkle tree, like, you know, sorry, you guys can be a part of this, kind of sucks. The only exception to that is Poly. Poly, I'm probably just going to do like a straight up, hey, we're going to treat this Poly like it's actually Hedron or whatever, but it's worth 1.1, 1.2, and you can just trade it back into the native thing. And then I think that opens the door that if there's ever like a Poly 2 or whatever, maybe something better than what Poly was going to do, now they're in a better position to participate in that versus like trying to fix what that ended up being. So I think that's probably the best way, is just kind of like trade in your Poly, we send it to the 0 address. You get a little extra, and but the rest of them, I'm coming up with a much more complicated thing that hopefully pans out.